No problem.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Oh my goodness.
Mm.
I had a message before from Yana going, don't forget to record it. And that's the thing that I forgot to do, even though I made myself 3 notes. So, okay, it looks like it's happening now. So I'll unmute myself again. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'll let you talk to these couple of slides, Jason.
No worries. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. So following on from the sort of setup that Kate's just talked about, I've been playing around with videos for a few years now. And a lot of the work, as I'm sure some of you are familiar with, that I tend to do goes a little bit more towards kind of physiological measures and, you know, seeing how people behave and various things like that. So the kinds of videos that we're going to talk about here are things that I have used in some of the work that I've done in the past, but obviously some of these approaches are quite limited. And some of these studies were raising as many questions as they were answering. So while we might have been seeing good kind of behavioral measures and psychophysiological responses to various different types of videos and the ways that things were being presented, there were lots of individual differences and other things that that made it difficult to interpret what might have been going on. And we're going to come back to talking about how the collaboration worked, but it certainly seems like an opportunity where, certainly from my perspective, we could broaden our thinking about different ways of understanding how students are thinking about and processing the kinds of videos that we're creating for them. So that was kind of part of the thinking behind this. And there are a number of things I think that show us, nice preempting when I was going to change slides, Kate. There are a number of things that seem to work quite well that are kind of minor tweaks that people can implement into the way that they're creating videos that I think are things that almost anybody could kind of achieve that seem to have a really positive impact on students' engagement with this medium. One of the things that's been reported quite widely is this idea that if a video is changed from the classic sort of talk straight to camera or talk straight over the top of slides as a kind of monologue to something that's a little bit more dialogue based, that seems to be more engaging, and it seems like students learn more from that particular kind of setup. So there's some clues out there about things that we can implement easily that seem to have that kind of positive effect on student learning and engagement. So that kind of created some of the grounding for where we went with this. So the basic setup was this. We had two different sets of videos. Now, these videos were on 2 different areas. One is about how neurons work, and the other one is on binary notation. One of the challenges, of course, with this is that people will have different amounts of experience with these. It's kind of interesting that I think I've looked at the binary ones a whole lot of times. I still don't get it. The neuron ones I'm a little bit more familiar with. So we wanted to kind of give people a mix of different topics to give us a sense of how this might play out. It also allowed us then to give people 2 different videos with different setups that were on different topics and see how they went with them. And there was a mix of monologue and dialogue. So everybody saw a monologue video and a dialogue video. One of them was on neurons and one of them was on how to do binary notation. So they were all kind of mixed up and everybody had a look at everything. And then from there, we wanted to see not just how much they learned from that, but what their experience was. How engaging did they find it? How interesting was it? You know, whether they kind of felt disengaged and had trouble with it, found it difficult, and so on. So I think this was kind of the power of the collaboration here, is that it wasn't just about the usual markers and things that I've tended to look for in the work that I've been doing, but working with Kate brought another perspective to this. I don't know if you want to touch on that briefly, Kate, that was aimed at enriching our understanding of what was going on.
Yeah, sure. We can probably look at that in the next sort of couple of slides. So that's an overview of our team. And really the origin of this research came from just, I don't know, serendipitous conversations really between Jason and I on a couple of occasions where we're kind of in the same space in terms of an interest in technology, but of course that's a really broad church, right? And so the way that Jason looks at learning technology and the way that I look at learning technology are really quite different. So we started to talk about, I wonder if there is a way, you know, actually I think it was after a conversation after a candidature review for a doctoral student, and we kind of were talking around this idea around, you know, prismatic understandings and how we need to sort of break down those, what I think it's Wersch refers to as terministic screens between ways of seeing things, that in a complex 21st century world, we actually need multidisciplinarity to be able to generate nuanced understandings of really complex and multi-dimensional phenomena that don't fall neatly into sort of disciplinary slices, you know, where we can carve it up, but where there is power in bringing those different kinds of perspectives together. So, and so while I was, you know, leading it in terms of, I guess, chooking around and with paperwork and things like that, it really was, it was collaborative, but there was also a strong mentorship process as well, which we'll talk to a little bit later. But I've got the dot points up there on the slide of sort of what we did. So it started out as Jason and I, and then Huong I connected with through Simone's similar grant. And when we were chatting in one of those meetings, and Jason and I had been saying, oh, you know, we'll need a research assistant. And I just thought, well, how easy would it be to have Huong who could work across both of those projects? And we talked that a bit in the other seminar, but it did work really nicely in terms of that cross-fertilisation of ideas, which I'll talk to more in a minute. And Faisal came on. So basically when 2020 happened and we had all of this data, and it was quite complex, and certainly quantitative is not my space at all. And then, you know, without actually clearing it with me, Jason and Tanya had a baby, which, you know, I'm not, I don't think that was, yeah. So what happened was, so I was sort of in this space where I was needing to sort of start exploring the data, but not quite sure where to go. And so, so Faisal sort of came in. So Faisal is one of my PhD students, and his thesis is mainly quantitative, and that's his space. And so I thought, oh, I wonder if Faisal would be keen, and he was keen as. So it was on like Donkey Kong. So
yes, here I am.
yeah. So, and then that worked out really nicely as well, because then when we were, all four of us were able to connect, all of these kind of organic mentoring relationships and connections started to unfold, which has been really nice. So in relation to this, and I'll kind of pass out to my colleagues, but basically in the dot points there, I won't insult you by reading them out to you. But basically, once we get to research assistance, that was where Huong came on, and she was just absolutely invaluable. So Huong had done the checkbox training through Italy, so was able to take the survey protocols and put them into checkbox, and it was quite complicated, wasn't it, Huong? Do you want
yes.
to add a bit to that?
Yeah, so we had the protocol from Jason, and actually me and Kate had to have a few meetings to understand the whole procedure in the protocol and to put it in checkbox because what I had from the training was quite basic, but the survey was more complicated compared with the training. So I had to go back and forth a few times and calling Italy, but they couldn't provide specific help at that time. So it was a learning curve for me and for Kate. And also the design of the survey is a complex one as well. So we have 2 videos of each type. So in total we have 4, and I used to call that a matrix of video to put in the survey. So but then we were able to make that with the protocol sent from Jason, and we double check that, triple check that, and put in a special key so that when we generate the data, we know which one is the correct answers and which one is not the correct answers. And we have to make sure that the version are correct, and it has neuron, binary, and also we have the dialogue and monologue in all the 4 versions.
Yes, and it was really complex. It was a real learning curve for both of us, I think. And the other dynamic with that was, so we recruited participants using, I think it's the 4th last dot point there, using a platform called Prolific Academic, which I had never heard of, but Jason had used. And he kept assuring me, look, just calm down. As soon as you put it up there, you will get data. It will pour in, just relax. And because I'd never done anything like this before, it was actually extraordinary. So Prolific is basically, it's through Oxford University, and it's a platform where you recruit people globally to participate in, to generate data in relation to surveys, and they're scholarly academic surveys, not sort of consumer surveys, but there is participant reward that goes with that, so they get paid sort of a base amount for doing it. So that was an entirely new world, and we had to kind of figure out how that worked, even just connecting, the Prolific, once you recruited the participants, and to connect that to the checkbox survey, and to make sure that everything followed, that they were able to access the ethical, the project information in ways that were appropriate. So it was a real stretch, but incredibly valuable to do. And the other dynamic of this, so while we did have some survey protocols and we knew what the correct answers were for those protocols, what we then added to this was some survey questions, including a couple of open-ended responses that explored those ideas around learner identity. So the participants' sense of themselves as learners, with video, and whether or not that played a role, their own sense of identity or sense of self as a learner in their perception of the video. So where Jason's interest and expertise is really in that sort of, I guess, how did you put it before, Jason, sort of in the neuroscientific space of, pre-testing and post-testing. I'm sort of interested in some of that stuff that's a little harder to measure sometimes. And so this was sort of an experiment as well in generating that kind of data, and to see whether we could, and what that would mean, and what that would tell us. So we collaboratively developed that survey and pilot tested it as well. Anything else in there? Covers it?
Oh, I think that covers it.
So I'm trying to use the committee's questions as sort of headings here to organise the ideas. So some of the challenges that we experienced, certainly this was well outside my comfort zone. And I think you felt a bit that way too, Huong, didn't you? Although you always looked very calm.
Yeah. So the way I thought about the survey was that, okay, so Kate has the username and password for Polyfic. So I think it is like a gate to open up for the participant to do our survey. So I assumed that my role was to design that survey and send the 4 links to Kate. However, what I didn't understand is that we need the code from the Polyfic for each participant to put in the checkbox survey. So I was undermined that and didn't put that little instruction into the checkbox surveys. So finally, we didn't have that code to check all the participants' answers. However, the good thing is that we have very clear and detailed instruction in the checkbox. So, but it is still an experience that I have to learn that in any instruction, if I do not understand, I need to check that back with other researchers in the group. So this is one of the challenges that I encounter.
Yeah, I think but it was, I mean, a couple of times I sort of felt like I went into the red zone on the left, but
yes.
the collegiality brings you back into the learning zone, and the learning zone is not necessarily comfortable. And even though I certainly knew that in theory, and I'm always saying it to my students, it's still confronting. You know, it certainly built my empathy there. And I guess the other dynamic there of inexperience of working with surveys. So I had worked with, you know, rich qualitative data, and that was my background. So I felt that I had absolutely no field habitus or capital in the space of the quantitative. So, but it was something that I had wanted to become more familiar with and more capable with. So this was an opportunity. And I guess COVID as well, I mean, we could all offer our views around that. I think, Jason, you were really hit hard, I think, by that in your role.
I think we all were. Yeah, so, I think we were all there.
And just the complexity, from what I understand, of actually, and Faisal will talk to this more momentarily, but just the process of actually, once you get the data, there's still a lot to do with it to make sense of that data and to be able to analyse it. And, you know, that's just not something that you do with the flick of a wrist. It's something that, you know, is complex and painstaking. So that was certainly a challenge as well. But I guess the take home from that is that those challenges were beneficial. I think I learned how to use tools that I had no idea how to use before, and now actually feel able to use them. So that's a massive shift. And I know, Huong, you've been talking about deploying some of those skills in another context with generating some data in a course that you're teaching. Do I remember that correctly?
Yes, yeah. So as I witnessed, Kate were able to develop a survey. So it is a kind of, is that exploratory research that you do in your course, Kate?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, yeah. So we have the same idea in our course, in one of the courses that I'm involved. So I would like to learn more you know, from Kate about that experience so that we can do that in our course as well. So after this busy time, I definitely catch up with Kate and learn more from how she designed that kind of research and apply for ethic clearance and the survey, so that a research can be done to improve the course. So.
Yeah, thanks, Huong. I've spoken a little bit about the mentoring already. So, but that was, I guess, one thing I do want to take the opportunity to do is to really thank Jason for his generosity and opening up, you know, the opportunity for me, and then by extension, Huong and Faisal. It's not something that I probably wouldn't have had the confidence, I don't think, to have applied for one of these small research grants just on my own. And probably felt a bit uncertain about, yeah, who would I even have approached, or, you know. So it was really very generous of Jason to give me the opportunity to be pushed and to stretch my wings a little bit. And, it was a relatively, it was a relatively low risk space for us to actually stretch our wings a little bit and try some new things. But the other kind of mentoring that we sort of didn't anticipate and which arose organically was with Faisal. So we had this role reversal. So where, I had been working with Faisal and helping him, I guess probably stretching him in relation to the qualitative. With your thesis, it shifted, didn't it, Faisal?
Yeah. Just Dr. Kate, about this opportunity. It actually is so much kind of you and Professor Jason and Huong as well. So this is, I talk about myself, sometimes I talk as a student, but sometimes I am a lecturer in university in Saudi Arabia. This has given me a good opportunity to work abroad from Australian perspective, especially our school, dealing with qualitative, which I come from a quantitative experience. So when I came to here, so I thought I just deal with number. So one of my supervisor, Tony Wright, he was with me and say, no, you can enjoy with the qualitative, and we can see all the dimensions that behind significant issues that happen in my thesis. So this has given me also a good opportunity to work with these knowledgeable academic here in our school.
And to contribute just as much, I think.
Yeah.
Say as he's learned.
Yeah.
So that's been really, really nice as well. And it was sort of an unexpected thing. And I guess for Faisal, it's something, and Huong, it's an experience that it goes onto the CV, and there's another experience that becomes part of their lived experience as academics. So that was really great. So I'm going to hand over to Faisal and Jason now, who are going to briefly talk through some of the findings before we return back to the committee's questions around outcomes and future plans. So over to you, Faisal, and I'll be the slide clicker.
Okay. So okay. Thank you, everyone. Just a quick, since Dr. Kate gave me this data and say, Faisal, welcome to our project, and say, I was shocked because I am in the period of submission my thesis. So this gave me, I said, okay, I am happy to do it. So since I receive from her 4 raw data, and structured data. So when I see all of these data and say, oh, how can I deal with that? Especially I have no experience about monologue or dialogue perspective. So when I receive this document, the first step I always done with the quantitative stuff is combine this data to move it to another way, which is structured data. So I combined all of these 4 files in one file, in SPSS and JASP as well. So I mentioned JASP here because I always encourage my friends who is doing quantitative, especially in social science, to deal with JASP because it's easy to use and it doesn't bring any problematic like SPSS. All of them is same way. It doesn't give me anything. Just I manipulate with the data between these 2 programs. Yeah, this is was the first step I have done in this project. So another second slide. I have generated the first question I asked Dr. Kate. I need to see the coding of that. And the answer was that we have no coding about this data, just a question. I said, oh, I need to think about each question, we need to code it as well, and we need to give him a value, because each question has a value that SPSS or this program can give me a decision eventually when I see a statistical method like multi-way ANOVA or exploratory factor analysis or this kind of stuff. So the first thing I have done here was in the green color. Maybe the I have generated for booklet, so I have changed it here in my slide, but because you have monitored the slide, I have changed it a little bit, but I have generated 3 booklets. One is the coding data, and the second, which is down about descriptive analysis, and the last thing, which is the main finding about this research. I was saying this is essential result because I need to show it with or share it with Professor Jason. Maybe he disagree with me, or there is another dimension I cannot see it. So as well as 2 files. One is in SPSS and another one is in JASP. So the second slide will be just say, this is some demographic data that I had generated from JASP, as make like beautiful shapes, and they give you the age and the gender and the experience of education and the educational level, or well, education level, which is I forgot this word, but it's like if he working in primary school or last certificate or qualification, sorry, from primary school to doctoral degree. So this is just an overview of that. Another slide is, the first thing when I see the raw data, I said, okay, oh my God, how can I see this data? Because so there is, as Dr. Huong mentioned in the previous slide, there is 4 versions of this video. So this version, from my eyes or from my lens, I see this is the project that belongs to 2 things. One is a grade, which is scores, and another thing is perception. So because I deal with perception in my thesis and adoption technology, this is also giving me idea how to separate the data in 2 ways. One is a score and one is perception. So we can run a lot of statistic method about a grade and another statistic for perception. So all of them is separate finding from what I have done in this project. Okay, the second slide would be, I need to mention how I did code the data, but maybe we give every question the value, and we code this data as a gender or as an age or as perception. I receive a point from 0 to 10. We move this one in the layout scale, and after that I can do. What happened with me here is plus you. The first essential finding in binary and neuron was significant relation to time. So when you repeat this exam many times, the degree will be increased. This means the questionnaire that helped our project or the team, the questionnaire was as a fit for their thinking or develop their results eventually. This is one result I find it from multi-way ANOVA. And the second, the second slide will be. There is another question, maybe Professor Jason will talk about the slide. The second slide will be, do you hear me?
maybe try just taking might be the headphones, the wires in the headphones. I wonder if they're a bit crackly.
No. The second slide, I think Dr. Jason will explain about what we're finding.
This one?
Yep, I'm happy to pick up from here. Thanks, Faisal. So I think what Faisal's done a great job with is to tease apart and pull together all the data that comes out of the system when you set it up like this. So it's inherently very messy, particularly because it's a within subjects design. So because everybody kind of did every condition, when the data is spat out of checkbox, it is quite difficult to then rearrange it in a way to be able to make sense of it. So Faisal did a wonderful job of doing a lot of that work so that I was then able to come in and start rearranging it so that it kind of made sense in regards to our original questions, which is really difficult to do and something that I think has always been a challenge with this kind of data whenever I've had it in the past. So bottom line here is that across the two main video styles that we were interested in, basically everybody learned something through watching those videos, and the difference between the two different kinds of videos, the monologue versus the dialogue, wasn't significant, which is interesting. It's not the same as some of the other data that we previously collected in relation to these videos. We have found differences in the past, and other people in other groups have also found differences, which may be an artifact of the wider kind of body of participants that we were drawing from through Prolific. So it's kind of an interesting outcome, but because it's only part of the story, all is not lost because we didn't see a huge difference between our two different types of videos. And I think that is partly, you know, the power of this collaboration in that we've got a richer story to tell that goes beyond just whether, you know, people learn differently from different kinds of videos. So Faisal, how's your microphone going now?
Now it's good.
Oh, it's still a bit patchy.
Mm.
Okay.
Ah, the joys of Zoom.
Yeah. Should I put it onto the next slide?
Yeah.
Now it's good.
If you hold it up close to your mouth, it should be okay. Yeah.
Now.
Yep.
Now it's good.
I think, yeah.
Because I have prepared. Okay. Do you hear me now?
That's okay. I can go through these if you like, Faisal. That might be easier.
Okay. Is that better?
Not really working. That's okay. I'll just take it from here, Faisal. That's okay. So the couple of other elements that we were interested in here is not just how much the participants learned from each of the videos, but also what their perceptions were of the different video styles, and importantly the content areas, because in the past we found that that's been a bit of a difference between them. So on the next slide, Kate. Thank you. So across the different versions of the videos, there was quite a bit of a difference in terms of people's kind of perceptions of how effective they found them to be. So this is a little bit small to see. On the left side, we've got the binary videos, and then there is a mixture of kind of responses to those, and that's partly also driven by whether they're monologue or dialogue. And then the neuron ones are on the right hand side. Again, it seems to make a difference whether people are seeing a monologue or a dialogue version of those videos. So what this tells us is, although there might not necessarily be a big difference in how much people learn from the different types of videos, the combination of content and whether or not they're delivered as a monologue or a dialogue does seem to have some influence on how much they think they're getting from those videos. which can then drive their decision-making process about whether or not they feel like they've learned effectively enough to move on or whether they need to revise again. So there's some important elements in here about the kind of decision-making process that would go on around how students are actually using these videos as a resource. So Kate, you're going to talk about the qualitative data.
So, yep, I'll just talk to this briefly. So the other dynamic here, and this is still, there's sort of this other layer of coding that will need to happen. So you've got there were two open-ended questions, and it was good actually. I wasn't sure because doing the pre-test, watching a video, doing a post-test, and then doing that twice, and then to get questions around perception and then have open-ended questions. I thought, I wonder how many people will actually be responsive in those open-ended questions. And we kind of looked at the prolific guidelines, and I sort of investigated what was an appropriate amount, to remunerate or reward people for their completion. And yeah, just about everybody offered a comment, in both of those open-ended qualitative response options, which was really great. So what I've done so far is pull them out and and look at each of into the 4 versions of the videos. So there's a few ways of slicing that data, and all I've done here is I've pulled up all of the comments in response to that particular question across all videos, just to illustrate it really, using I've just used the Cirrus word cloud. I don't know if anyone's used that before. That was something that I'd worked with word clouds, but I hadn't used this, and Faisal showed me this tool. And you still have to sort of tweak the data a little bit, maybe clean it up, pull out some repeated words that aren't necessarily relevant to go into the cloud. But this was just a simple word cloud generated in response to the question, what do you think actually makes a video effective and why? So that's a sort of a beginning way of starting to look at the data and just seeing, what actually emerges as commonly cited elements of an effective video from the participants. But the other ways that I'm looking at this data at the moment is looking at, there's obviously, thematic analysis that you can do to interpret the responses to those open-ended questions around what their perceptions were, code them, and then thematically analyse them to see what the themes are and draw conclusions from those. But the other one that's interesting, particularly in relation to the second question is, which was how would you describe yourself as a learner, is an approach I've only stumbled upon sort of in recent times called sentiment analysis. So actually looking through the data to have a look at the words that convey a sense of emotion or sense of self, and how the participants expressed those things, and then sort of drilling right down in and looking at things like even adjectives, sentence structure, adverbs, keywords, to look at the positivity, neutrality or negativity of the opinion expressed. So again, I think a limitation, of this is that, and I'm not sure, but I imagine that the folk who are participants on Prolific Academic, they seem to be reasonably, well-educated people, just even looking at the demographic data that Faisal pulled. So, we may, I'm not sure yet, have, maybe we have a skew towards people who generally are orientated to learning, because they're not just doing consumer surveys, they're actually doing academic surveys and learning from them. Is that a fair comment? Jason, you've got more sort of experience in this space than me.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair comment.
Yeah. So that will be. Oh, sorry, here's Faisal. Yeah.
Yeah, we have seen here in the previous slide, previous slide.
The one back.
Yep. The mic is working. Or
no, it's really funny.
No.
Oh, shame. Sorry about that, Faisal.
Oh, that's
So that's kind of our another layer, but I think the other dimension to this, so you've got the qualitative data that you can pull out and look at, and, you know, I'm like a pig in mud with that. But the other dimension is actually then linking the qualitative comments and the learner perception survey questions and looking at that in relation to their outcomes in the actual test. So that's a reasonably complex process as well that will require us all to kind of pitch in together and have a look at that. But there's a few ways that we can slice that data, and there's some really interesting things in there. Actually, people were very generous with the offerings that they gave us, which was just fantastic. So in terms of outcomes, which was another of the research committee's questions, we'll sort of share talking to some of these, but I think probably the one that for me that has been most powerful is those collegial connections. Actually having the experience in what, for me, I find anyway, is a very solo space, and having a reason and a purpose and an opportunity to actually work with other people. And this was really collaborative and mentoring, you know. So we each brought something that someone else didn't have. So we really brought something quite unique for which we were individually responsible, but which when combined together created something that was bigger than the sum of its parts. So those collegial connections were really important. Jason, do you want to talk to the TIG?
Yeah, so Kate and I, with Christina and Blake McKimmie and a team across the university, were successful in getting a teaching innovation grant last year. And I think the conversations that we had were important in helping provide the foundation for that. So even though it was early on in the project when we were thinking about that, I think the conversations about how we can make sense of the kind of quantitative data that we already have in the university around videos that are being used in Blackboard and in Edge and in the MOOCs and various other places, with what's actually happening in kind of the learner stories that sit underneath them. And that was a key part of what ended up being in that teaching innovation grant proposal. So this project, I think, was really important foundation for building up towards that. So we're just hoping that we can actually use the money and get somebody to help with that at some point in the near future.
Yeah, one of those uncertain things at the moment. Yeah. The last dot point in the first column there about capacity building, I think that that's been really key. I feel that my capacity has been expanded in ways that I would never have done if I hadn't had this opportunity. And Huong mentioned earlier, you know, so from this experience, then that gave me the capacity to get into Checkbox myself and put together just a short survey that I'd like to do with my students this semester, and as a little bit of a launch into generating some data around my students' sense of themselves in relation to technology, which is their professional identities in relation to technology. So I would never have even had a go at that before. I would have just felt too intimidated by the process. So that, I don't think you can really put a price on that. That capacity building has been really immense. Our publication plans, one thing that I learned, so for Faisal, because of the significant contribution that Faisal has made, for Faisal in Saudi, it's really important that he has his PhD conferred before he puts a publication out, because that in his context is much more highly valued. So I think it's appropriate, given Faisal's contribution, that we honour that and give him an opportunity to benefit from those publications as well. But I can see I've got draft outlines, and we've talked around, you know, at least 2 papers that we'll be able to generate, which is great. I think Foundations for Future Research I've spoken to already. And then I guess finally that shifting mindsets. So this was me before before doing this research project. Thank you to Drake for that contribution. And now this is me afterwards. So, you know, I can see opportunities that not just for myself, but to be able to actually enrich the lives of my doctoral students, to be able to work with other early career researchers and research assistants like Huong, who is just so incredibly capable and has a lot to offer the school. And yeah, I think that the potential of it is much more than just what this research has been. It's actually been something that has been exponentially greater than that in terms of what it's done through capacity building, mentoring, discomfort, and other opportunities to connect. So there we are. I was worried we wouldn't fill the time, but there you go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions. I don't think there's any in the chat. Did anybody have a burning question they'd like to ask? I'd like to throw one in, and this is for you, Kate. It sort of goes back to right at the start. You mentioned something about deterministic screens, and I kind of missed the significance of that and wonder if it's going to come out in your analysis in some way. It sounded like a really interesting idea to me.
Yeah, that's certainly not my idea, but that's one that Wersch draws on when he sort of explores Vygotsky's theory of mediated action. I think Peter's here; he could speak to this much more authoritatively than me. But that idea that we need to make sense of complex phenomena, we can't be doing it all on our own in our little burrows, in our silos, that we're stronger and can be more nuanced when we explore ideas and experiences from multiple perspectives. So to be able to take Jason's research orientation and expertise, mine is quite different. You know, we're really very different in a whole range of ways. Our methodological background, our ontological orientation, all of those things. But together, well, maybe we can see something differently, or some nugget that comes to light. So certainly that will be something that we'll be exploring. And I think, as Jason spoke to earlier, that and I think that the participants' perceptions are just as important as what their outcomes might have been in terms of a score, because that can affect the way they see themselves as learners. It can affect their decision making, their level of participation in certain kinds of activities or learning areas. So yeah, this idea of actually connecting with one another and just seeing what can we do if two people interested in the same thing but from a completely different orientation, what can happen? Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask of the team? Okay, so maybe I'll go one more. We do have a couple of more minutes left. So I guess, just pursuing that further in terms of, thinking about how to write about this project now. So given these kind of distinctive ontological, epistemological sort of driving forces, what's the likely, like how do you produce something interesting out of that? Or how do you frame that, I guess?
You mean in terms of a written product?
Yeah. I'm curious about how you position that, as an output, I guess.
You mean in terms of targeting it? Like where does it go? Yeah. That's a good question actually, because I can't sort of, I've been sort of ferreting around, you know, having a look at you know, which journals and, you know, where would that go? I think there are some that sort of are interested in that. I mean, even just AGET, I don't mean just AGET, but AGET is interested in a lot of that intersection between, there's really interesting work between, you know, empirical and hard data, and also looking at the learner experience and learner identity and the kinds of issues that flow from it, like digital and
I'm not sure if we talked about this, Kate, but we can't put it in AGET anymore, sorry.
Oh, can't we?
No,
I don't remember.
I'm taking over as the editor.
Oh, that's right. No, we can't. Right, AGET's off the list. My
sorry.
short list. But I think it's about creating as well a compelling rationale for it. So I think in any publication, part of what's interesting about it is the story behind it, that it unfolds from professional conversation and collaboration, and that there was a deliberate effort, you know, to try and work collegially and to sort of connect two different ways of looking at things. So I think there's sort of a philosophical element to it, as well as actually the research itself. So I think you'd have to, I think it would be preferable to package it like that, so that people had a full picture of actually what had motivated the research and what the goals were, and how that's then played out in other spaces. So in terms of framing, I guess finding ways of actually, because a lot of this is about figuring out how to ask the right questions of your participants, I've learned. So there's been some important learning there as well around framing questions that we want the answers to.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I connect by phone.
There you go.
So just, I need to just add a little bit of the question of Jason, Dr. Stephen, about there is some connection when I analyze the data. We find some connection between qualitative and quantitative. So, for example, when I say the perception of a student in the binary or neuron, we find the difficulty of topic has affected their perception. So students find binary is difficult to understand, especially dealing with 0-1, 0-1, and with a neuron topic is maybe understand more easier than binary. So I have seen some connection between them. So maybe in the future, we need to make connection between qualitative results and quantitative. We can give more explanation about this finding. Yep.
Thanks, Faisal. I mean, it could be a complete perfy, but I'm always interested in the purposes of research and how, you know, they don't have to be distinctive or different or in conflict, but, you know, the caricature of quantitative and qualitative is that they are set up for different purposes. So it's, I don't know if there's a sort of vein of exploration in there to help frame the work, you know, as a way of keeping that as a problem, I guess, that you are finding a kind of, not necessarily a solution, but, you know, an example of bringing together different kinds of goals of research or purposes for research with different kinds of outcomes. So I don't know if that's a possible link. Okay, we are just about out of time. If anybody would, does anybody have a last question or want to make a final comment? All right. Oh, I can see something in chat. Kim, congratulations. Excellent. So
Thanks,
this video, now it's been recorded, will be put into the School of Ed webpage under past events. There'll be a link there. So thanks very much, everybody, and thanks everybody for coming along to the presentation, and great to hear about this really interesting research, and good luck for all of your future endeavours with it. Look forward to reading. Look forward to reading about it when it's published.
Thank you. I think too, I just really want to, I know Simone and expressed this in her presentation as well, but I honestly just cannot thank the research committee enough for this initiative. It's just been, yeah, it's just been the most fantastic opportunity. It was something that it built my confidence and capacity hugely, and I just really appreciate that, and really, really grateful for it. So thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thanks very much, everybody, on that very positive and lovely note. See you later. Au revoir.
See you later. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming. See you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.